Thanks, everyone.
And I might begin by welcoming you here this evening, Shirley. It's wonderful that you could join us. And of course, the Southeast film community is incredibly excited this week with news that there's been a funding grant from Screen New South Wales of $20,000 to help to kickstart a bit of a concept film industry in the Southeast region. So
that's great.
We've really lucked out getting you here this evening because I know that the audience is going to be wanting to ask you some questions. But let's begin. First of all, why are you here in the beautiful Southeast? You've got a few interesting projects on the run at the moment, including a novel.
Well, that's right. Well, the reason I'm here is promoting. I'm on a book tour actually because I've written a book called Russia, which is about the killer whales of Eden, and that's the whole story. And that originally started off as a feature film script, and then when I couldn't get it made, I turned it into a novel. So
okay, so it really did start off in your mind as being an on-screen product.
It was actually, it was a full-blown written feature film script that I tried to get made for quite a long time, and I got a lot of knockbacks because it's a very expensive project. You know, it's there's so much CG. You know, when John Huston made Moby Dick all those years ago, he actually went and filmed a real whale chase. You know, a real whale. There were harpoons and real whales in that. But you can't do that anymore. And, you know, certainly you can't, train a squad of killer whales to participate in it either. So the whole thing obviously is CG, which is, really, it's becoming slightly less expensive, but it's so prohibitively expensive. And I had a lot of trouble pitching the idea too. I'm not a very good pitcher at the best of times, but Russia was particularly hard to pitch as a feature film script because, basically I'd pitch it as a romantic comedy set against a backdrop of whale slaughter, which...
Blood, guts, romance.
And I can remember describing to, producers, including this particular American producer, how, the killer whales would take their share of the whale. They'd take the
tongue and the blubber.
And the lips, and then the rest of it, the whalers would take. And I can remember just describing how the killer whales would pull the carcass down and to eat the tongue and the lips, and I could see his kind of involuntarily gagging, and I never even got to the bit about the rheumatism cure, where people were immersing themselves into the fermenting carcass to try and cure themselves of rheumatism, which is true. They did that. Anyway, so I had a lot of trouble. I'm segueing into talking about Russia straight away, but I wrote the script. I was really happy with the script. It was similar to the novel. It was a similar kind of arc to the story. There was a romance. There was struggling, community, struggling family trying to catch whales and all the rest of it. But it was kind of simpler because the novel has much more detail in it. But it was it became so difficult that in the end I had to just consign it to the bottom drawer where failed scripts so often end up.
And how difficult was it for you as the creative mind behind that story to say, okay, I'm no longer going to be in a position where I can produce and direct and create this thing on screen, but I still want to nurture it? I mean, was it a complex process to then transfer it into a novel?
Well, yes, I basically just gave up on it. So I just thought, well, that was a waste of a couple of years, which is a little bit like that in film, that you have to, you sort of take a punt so often that you're writing something off your own bat. You're taking a punt that someone will like it. You really are, and you have to develop it all the way so often before anyone. No one's going to give me money to write a film about killer whales.
Well, let's look at that organic nature of the industry, because that's obviously something that alarms a lot of people when they consider perhaps venturing out into film or television or even just anything creative. How difficult was it for you to get into the industry, and did you know from the get-go what you wanted to achieve?
Well, I mean, I've been in the industry a long time, and so things have kind of changed, since I started out. I went to the Australian Film and Television School in the 80s, mid-80s. I sort of just followed Jane Campion, so that was, that was that era. It was a 3-year course there, and I sort of majored in script writing, but everyone at that time had the opportunity to make a short film whilst they were there, their final year film. They gave us a budget of about $8,000, I think, which was fairly healthy back then, and plus you had all your equipment, and so it was great because you got to make a little film, and for me, and that's something I think that if you have the opportunity to do it, it's great to make just something small that can be your calling card, which is why I think Tropfest is things like that are such valuable sort of competitions and forums, because if you can make a tiny little calling card, and in my case I made a short film, it was about 15 minutes long, but it was a little bit comic in tone, my normal style is a little bit comic, and it just in lots of ways the opportunity I had at film school, I was so privileged back then. It was free to go. It's not only free to go there in the 80s, but they paid us a wage to go there, because they felt talk about glory days. I was very lucky. I went to university when it was free, dropped out, then went to film school when they paid you to go there. I was incredibly lucky. Because, of course, none of that exists anymore.
Well, now it's almost prohibitively expensive to attend a lot of these. And a lot of people then start to question their judgment as to whether they should do those
Exactly,
courses.
I know. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to have come through at that time. So it was... so I went there and, made the short film. And that film won a couple of awards, and it became my calling card. And so... people would see the film and they'd think, "Oh, I'll have a look at see." When I had a script to show, they were interested in reading it. So I was, I was very lucky. And so what happened was, when I finished film school, I went into television pretty well straight away, directing, and I started off, on shows like A Country Practice, which were, sort of old school multicam shows, but quite good to learn the ropes on.
Absolutely.
And then sort of moved up to shows like Heartbreak High, I think, and was the next show I did. And bit by bit, you start to gather your skills. But you're directing actors a lot. You're working with the camera a lot, and so you start to almost by osmosis just start to get some skills. which somehow I'd gone through 3 years of film school and not really acquired many filmmaking skills.
So that answers our question about whether you should do the courses or not.
However, I did get to make a film without any filmmaking skills. Yeah, but in between jobs, what I was going to say was that I started writing my own feature film script, which was Love Serenade, which was my first film. And because I had this little film that people had liked, and Jan Chapman, who produced Love Serenade, liked it. She was interested to read the script of Love Serenade because she'd seen the film. And I think if you've got some little piece you can do as a calling card, that's appealing enough, that can really help.
And of course, Love Serenade set in a regional setting.
That's right.
Now, how important was that for you, and what did it, I guess, change for you once you were able to do that?
Well, Love Serenade, I grew up in Melbourne, so I'm not rural at all, a city person. But my husband grew up in this town called Robinvale, which is northwest Victoria, and every Christmas we'd go there to for Christmas holidays. And I don't know if anyone's seen Love Serenade, but it's a very small town, and there's wheat silos, and there's a river, and there's a hairdresser and a Chinese restaurant. So that's kind of very
like a few towns,
like
in
a few
area.
Small towns, yeah, very sparse, but very flat, arid landscape. So it's quite striking cinematically. Just the look of the region is very striking, and it was so minimal in a way that it felt like almost a stage set. It was inspiring to write for because it was so contained in a way. And so I suppose, having grown up in a sprawling city, just to sort of be surrounded by wheat silo, Chinese restaurant, all those.
So what came first? The
location
came first,
yeah.
And then the script.
The location came first, and with me, location tends to come first because I think location is so inspiring, especially for film, because the film has to look interesting. You know, the film has to arrest your interest visually, and it somehow sparked my imagination to write this funny little story within this town, and so I wrote it, and then there was some resistance to shooting in this town because Robinvale, because it was quite a long way away. You know, it was about 6 hours north of Melbourne. It wasn't close to any big regional areas, big centres. It was a long way away, and so there was a fair bit of resistance, and so I had to lobby quite hard for us to shoot there because it's so expensive, and that is the problem. You know, it's so expensive to ship the whole crew down there, put them up for, you know, a couple of, 6 to 8 weeks, and the actors, although it wasn't a big cast, and so luckily Jan Chapman, my producer, sort of conceded that it was worth it for the look of the film. If
we then consider how beautiful the setting was and how worthwhile it was, and how pleased you were with the end result, do you think perhaps the industry has changed its mindset at all about filming in regional locations, and even potentially starting to source some of their crew in regional locations to save some of those costs?
I don't know. My feeling is there's always a difficulty about going so far away. It's always expense. Filmmaking is such an expensive exercise at the best of times, let alone having to put the crew up, which is the big expense. And it's all, you know, the things that have to be. I mean, in those days we used to have to ship the rushes, because film rushes, back to Melbourne or Sydney or whichever was the closest town. Now that's not such an issue. But I wrote another film called Self-Solitary, which I made in 2010, which is set. I've been reading a lot about the remote Tasmanian lighthouse islands in the days before they had any wireless communications. Wireless back when wireless meant radio, and not Wi-Fi, and when they used to have to rely on pigeons for, you know, homing pigeons for communication between the lighthouse islands and the mainland. And there were most fantastic stories about that, and again it was a case of location. The location sparked my imagination, and I flew by helicopter to this remote lighthouse island called Matsyka Island, which is off the south coast of Tasmania. The most beautiful, rugged, craggy rock of an island with a lighthouse and 3 keepers' cottages. That's all it had. So fantastic setting. And you just look at it and thought, oh my God, this would be an incredible film because it's so strikingly beautiful. And who gets to see these places? You can only get there with the National Parks helicopter, you know, they have a caretaker on there. That's the only person that can see it. So I was desperate to shoot my film, which I'd said on this remote island was a film about lighthouse life, and that was, you know, of course, that was an impossible
logistical nightmare.
It was
as
a
far as the film
logistical
industry is
nightmare.
concerned.
We really explored it, but it meant that you had to. There wasn't even enough room for the crew to sleep on the island because there were only the 3 lighthouse keepers' cottages
and some penguins.
And they didn't even have penguins. There was this island. They didn't even have that. But there was so little there, and also, you know, getting anyone on and off was so difficult because the weather would suddenly, you know, the roaring 40s would sweep in off the Antarctic or whatever, and, you know, it was just no way we could do it. And in the end, I had to finally give up on shooting on.
So it was literally impossible to do it.
It was impossible.
And would that be different
I think
today, do you think?
Well, I shot this in 2010, and I think if you had a huge budget, maybe you could do it. And I know that they've made a film about lighthouses, but that book, does anyone remember the name of that book? That was about a lighthouse.
The Lighthouse Stevenson?
No, not that one. The Light in Between Two Oceans or something like that. I don't know if anyone's heard it. I think it was a US book, English, I'm not sure. Anyway, they've made a film of that, and I think they shot on Cape Bruni, which is not a real island because there's a road to it. But so they had more money to throw at it than we do, because you just don't have those kind of budgets in Australia.
So does that make it, I guess, an endless struggle for you as somebody working in the industry to literally be almost thinking ahead for your next project and thinking about the pitch, thinking about the plan, thinking about the budget well before you can actually start the project?
I'm not that, unfortunately not that sort of organised in my thinking. I think I just lurch from one kind of haphazard project to the next. And
But you seem to lurch to such good projects, Shirley. I mean, you really had a wonderful run, and even more recently with Offspring.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm just a director on Offspring, but what well, you know, it's not I didn't create Offspring, but what I was going to say about Self-Solitary is when we realised that we couldn't shoot on the lighthouse island of Matsaika, we finally had to. Well, we got money from Film Victoria. That was a big thing, and we had to shoot. Basically, I remember my producer saying, "Well, we're just going to have to shoot in Victoria," and me just thinking, "What? You know, I went to Tasmania. You know, all this beautiful island. Now I have to shoot in Victoria." So it's in some ways, I was forced to. It was good for me, really, because I was forced to think creatively within my restrictions, and in the end, it worked miraculously well for us. We shot off Cape Nelson, which is off Portland. I don't know if anyone knows that area of Victoria, right on the coastline, almost near the South Australian border, and a very craggy, wild landscape. And basically, we made it look like an island, and it looks like an island. We had one CG shot at the beginning, I think, where we shot it from the sea, and you know, sort of, they did some effects so it looked like an island instead of just the headland, and that was enough to get away with it, really. Because once you're on an island, of course, it just looks. You're not really aware that you're.
And do you think that's some of the, I guess, the positives that have come out, and changes in technology and changes in the industry, that we are able to be a little bit more adaptive than perhaps we once were?
That's true, yeah.
Are there therefore, you know, some advantages for regional areas to take up some of those pros and try and minimise the cons and the expense?
Yes, I suppose so, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that regional areas have to offer, and really it's in some ways the only thing that you have, is the landscape, because that's something that can't be got elsewhere, I think, and every director wants their film to look as amazing as possible, and so I think, and I mean, so often if we're forced, you know, we'll get scripts where you want to shoot 4 hours away from Sydney, and it gets pulled back, and you're shooting 45 minutes away in the end, in some, you know, some little bit of parkland or something. That you know, that's something we have to deal with all the time, and television's got even less money than film. But if something, I think the thing is, if a project absolutely needs the visuals of your area, then they will come. I think that's the thing. They'll realise that they can only be here, you know, only in this area or that area or wherever. That's the big thing that pulls people, you know, that will make them spend the money, I think, more than any other factor.
If you had to choose film or television, which would it be?
Well, I feel like I've been very, very lucky to have made 3 feature films in my career, and to have made them here in Australia, I think, because the wonderful thing about making a film here is that, you know, you may not get the hugest budget in the world, but it's still a healthy budget to be able to do, you know, to do what you want to do. And it's an untrammeled experience. No one is going to kind of recut it or kick you off the project and put someone else on it, or all those horrible things that you hear about happening in Hollywood. So it's a kind of much, for creative freedom, it's so great to be here to do it. So I feel like I've had that fantastic opportunity to do that. But in lots of ways, I think television has just become so great now. You know, there's so much great television, you know, with the whole HBO kind of tradition. Of course, again, they have massive budgets that we don't have, but it's still. I think there's more in Australia. Also, there's an appetite for making more adventurous television now, and in lots of ways, I'm attracted to the long form of television, where you know a story can unfold over you know many episodes, as opposed to trying to keep it contained in you know in a 90-minute feature film script.
And in that sense, are we maybe missing a country practice and the Sullivans and some of those old school TV series that just went on and people loved and embraced? I mean, Wild Boys was obviously a classic example of a series that Australia truly embraced. Yeah. How important is it to get the right story, get the right characters to get those audiences engaged and wanting to stay with you?
Well, very important. I mean, in the case of a show like Offspring, I mean, they're going again on that series. It finished. It actually finished properly, and then Channel 10 decided that they needed it back again, and so it's resurrected itself, and it's going again. And that's entirely because of the characters of that show. That a lot of people really love them, and really care about them, and they want to see them come back again. So I think that's, you know, you have to create great characters, you know, for people to follow.
And if we look at those characters, do you think part of the appeal of Offspring and some of those other TV series that you've worked on is that they are real characters? They're real people. It's a believable script, and people do feel that they almost have walked into their own living room.
Definitely, that's right. I mean, they're always slightly heightened, I think, those characters, but there's a reality, there's a heart to the way they're depicted, and they're beautifully, you know, certainly in Offspring, there's been some beautiful performances in that show. That you know, I mean, I think Asha Keddy, people just keep wanting to watch her because she's so affecting. She's so good in comic performances and you know in drama as well.
So Shirley, what would you say to a room full of people who are passionate about entering into this industry in some creative form, whether it is in script writing or production or directing or acting? Yeah. What is some of the advice that you would offer to people about this industry and how to try and immerse themselves in it and become successful?
I think I really believe that you have to. The most important thing is to be true to yourself, and to try and keep your own original point of view. I think that there's an awful thing that happens in the film industry because it's become such a business. I think, you know, especially in the US, but also here. And what arises out of all that is this awful formulaic approach to filmmaking and script writing, which I think is the antithesis of creativity. And it's really depressing. You know, I just don't want anything to do with all that. You know, there's lots of really dismal books about screenwriting that just make you want to kind of just give up. You know, I just
Writer's Journey.
Yeah, almost unreadable, many of them. Is the Writer's Journey the Robert McKee one? Do you remember?
No, McKee's a champ compared. No, what was his name? Vogler?
I can't remember.
His name, I had a go at it.
I know.
I thought he's
been
on the mescaline cocktail or something.
And is that part of the issue, that you can only, you know, read and watch and learn so much, and ultimately you do have to just jump off that cliff and give it a go, get creative?
Yes. Well, what I was going on to say also is that I think it's your sort of original viewpoint and the way you tell your story that is what's going to make people pay attention, and that if you're just copying something that other people have, or conforming to these rigid sort of constraints that are somehow set upon. It's extraordinary how these books have risen up. This whole industry has risen up around filmmaking and particularly and also television, and you know, I was watching the other day Some Like It Hot. I don't know if you know that film with, you know, Toni Curtis and Jack Lemmon, and that is such a wild film, and it's so playful and inventive, and just I can't imagine how they get that film over now, because it's so ridiculous, you know, but so beautifully crafted and so funny and wonderful, and but you know, we've become, I think, way too formulaic and prescriptive in our approach to things. So I guess what my answer would be to just try and make something that's really true to yourself, and you know, I say this to writers and to directors as well. Just make something or write something that you personally would like to read or to see, that you find entertaining and hope, you know, hopefully they will follow. Is my thing, because I've taught at the film school too, and I again I find that if I'd gone through film school now, I think I would have not survived it, really, because it's kind of depressingly prescriptive in that way, whereas in our day they just left us alone. You know, they seemed to find teaching kind of just altogether a bit too hard. But in a way that was good, because we were just left to muddle through, and in a way that helped us find our own way of doing it.
And to develop your skills. Well, what
That's
about
right.
What about knockbacks? That seems to be a big part of this
Oh,
industry.
definitely. It's a huge part of the industry.
Does it ever get any easier?
You do get a thick skin, but it's quite difficult. I mean, it comes down to that whole idea of, like with Rush Show, for example, I wrote the screenplay, and that took a fair bit of time, and I wasn't paid to write it, and then, you know, you just get knocked back after knockback, and you have to give up on it, and that's a lot of work to, you know, that. But I've also had written scripts that have then gone on to get made. So it's tricky. You have to find a way. You have to be prepared to find other ways to support yourself, and to go down that course, and to not mind too much. But I mean, it's how to get people to pay attention to you, and to be interested in what you're doing. I think it's really worth, if there is anyone here who's wanting to sort of put their concept forward towards producers, I think it's really worth just polishing that, and not worrying about genre or what. And they'll tell you, you know, that you should conform to this, and this, and all the rest of it. But my advice is really to try and ignore that and to crash through, because I feel that what they really want is something that's original and fresh, and not just the same old stuff. I mean, was it what you sent me? I think that link to that roadshow just want to make Australiana films.
Yes.
Was it you?
Yeah,
Kate. Yeah.
Kate, yep.
Which unfortunately I couldn't. I was like, what? And I couldn't read the article, unfortunately. For some reason I couldn't access that link. But I found that very depressing, that you would have to, that they just want to make these Aussie films that don't connect with. I mean, they might be nice little films, but they're not true to any kind of Australia that we know.
That's not necessarily what you're seeing in the industry. You're suggesting that really it's more about an original concept or an original idea.
Well, I suppose that's what I would like to see. Perhaps it's not what's going on. I mean, I guess Roadshow are saying that because they've had some big hits with, Red Dog and, you know, those more Aussie films, Oddball and stuff.
And in that sense, we're now seeing, of course, international film companies more and more actually coming to Australia to do more shooting and more filming.
Right,
I mean, that's got to be a positive, I guess, for the industry.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
do you think perhaps it may dilute what is unique about the Australian film industry?
I don't really, because I think when the Americans come and shoot here, that's always just great, because it means that everyone can polish their skills on American shows, and they pay really well, which is what's great. But I mean, I remember I got a job as second unit director on Peter Pan, which was shot on the Gold Coast, a long time ago. There was a remake of Peter Pan that P.J. Hogan directed, and I was doing some second unit work on that. And, it was fantastic because you got to play on, big sound stages that I would normally never be able to access. And so, they just suck up all this crew, so that a lot of people get to work on this big stuff. So I think that's great, that when the Americans come and when the Yankees come, not just for their silk stockings and their cigarettes, but for the,
What's next for Shirley Barrett? Once the novel has gone around the country and everybody has met you and loved what you're doing with that, what's the next project for you?
Well, at the moment, I'm Offspring's going again, and so I'm actually writing a script this time for Offspring, which is nice.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really happy to do that because it's kind of hard to, it's sort of, you do get boxed a bit in the industry, and so if for some reason in television they never see me as a scriptwriter, they only ever see me as a director, and so I've always like, well, I can write as well. No, just go out and direct. And so I'm happy about that. So I'm writing an episode, and then I've got a big block next year of a show called A Place to Call Home, which I do. It's on a Foxtel show, a sort of big bodice-ripping melodrama, which is quite fun to work on. And so that's my next, the next kind of 6 months to a year for me. And then I think, I'll kind of, I'm trying to imagine a life where I might do a bit of TV and then go off and write a novel and see if I can get that kind of balance happening in my life. But
And have you perhaps got another feature film bubbling away? A landscape that's captured your
I
heart?
have to say, Bega's pretty gorgeous. Or travelling through here, I thought, I think a horse movie.
What an excellent idea.
I look, in lots of ways I find the thought of a feature film a bit daunting now, to be honest. It's so it takes so much to get a feature film off the ground now, and in lots of ways, and this might be encouraging to you guys, it's easier almost to make a film when you're an unknown talent. When you've made a few films, they kind of know who you are, and they think, do we really want another Shirley Barrett film? No. And so in a way it gets a little bit harder. Whereas if you're thinking like, that person looks really interesting and new and fresh, I think in a way, and it's always been like that. It was like that for me even when I started. If you're the new one, they're kind of interested. So the fact that I'm sort of feeling like maybe I won't make another feature film for a while it's just possibly because I think it's getting harder and harder for me to get a film up. Whereas I think that it's the film industry is kind of focused on a little bit on the new ones, the ones that come up, which is good in lots of ways. It's a healthy way to be. I mean, I really like Russia to get made into a film, but I don't know if that's likely given all that CG and
We've got lots of whales around here. I'm sure we could organise something.
I can't kill them.
Maybe a little bit of CG. Shirley, if we go back just a couple of years to that young Shirley Barrett who decided that university was not for her, that she was going to go and enter the film industry, if you could whisper in her ear now, maybe offer some advice and some paths that perhaps she didn't need to travel, what would that be?
I really just feel like I've had a very privileged career, and I'm really fortunate. I think the one thing I'd probably tell myself to do is after Love Serenade, I got a lot of international interest because it had won an award at Cannes, and I suddenly had a lot of offers from America, and I knocked them back, which is nuts.
Why? Why did you choose?
At the time, I had two small, very young babies. Like there was like 1 and 2. They were very young, and also I think possibly the thought. So I thought it felt a bit hard to go over there, but I think the reality really is that I had such good luck with my first film. that I just imagined this would continue. And it doesn't necessarily continue. So I think I imagined that I'll just keep writing and directing, and you know, glory will surely follow. And it didn't. And so I perhaps I should have taken those offers when they came, because it was a short window really for you when you have that kind of good luck. But even then, I don't feel particularly regretful about that, because I think
we've got so many other beautiful projects.
Well,
instead.
that's right. I mean, I feel like, you know, I like making films here because I'm allowed to do it my way, and you know, there's no doubt that they have bigger budgets, and you know, I'd love to have a go at directing American TV, you know, which again is bigger budgets and so forth, but I almost feel in a way like I'm slightly segueing into a sort of more sedate, you know, sort of a career where I'm more a sort of lady novelist who dabbles in TV every
Well, the
now
pressure's
and
on now, because we'll now all be awaiting your second
then.
novel.
I know. That is
What
pressure.
happens
That's
next?
big pressure.
Talking of which,
Yep.
let's go through favourite film of all time and why.
Yeah, sure. Okay. My favourite film of all time is Dog Day Afternoon, which was, do you know that? Oh, good. Oh, that's great to get that response. Oh, I love that film. It came out in 1975. Those people who don't know it, it's Al Pacino was the lead. John Cazale was in it too. And it's a film, Dog Day Afternoon means the afternoon of the longest day of the year. And it's about a bank robbery, and it's almost in real time. It's quite a long movie, almost 3 hours, I think. And it's about a bank robbery that unfolds and goes pretty badly. And Al Pacino's character is doing it so he can fund a sex change operation for his boyfriend, which makes it sound sort of kind of comic, almost something like a hot, but it's not. It's a bit of a drama, but there's beautiful comic moments in it. And the director was Sidney Lumet, and the screenwriter was Frank Pearson. It came out in 1975. I was 14 years old, and it was playing at the Rapallo Cinema in Flinders Street in Melbourne. My friend and I figured out a way of sneaking into that cinema, and we saw it, 14 years old, 14 times. And I've seen it many more times since, but we just loved Al Pacino, so we'd go in and watch it over and over again every weekend, and without paying for it, sadly. And but it's still, I think, I mean, even though it's not you know, a style that I've tried to emulate, it's just such a beautifully told, completely. There was just, I think I love that cinema that was happening in the US in the 70s, where it was very, very realist. And, you know, it's the story's told quite slowly. The performances are completely based in truth and reality. And it's just got a real depth and heart to it that I still watch it now and love it. So, I mean, there's a lot of films that I love, but Dog Day Afternoon is the big film for me. I just, you know.
That's everybody's homework, by the way.
If you haven't seen it, yeah, it's wonderful. It's a great film. I'm sure you'll really enjoy it.
Favourite television series?
Breaking Bad, of course.
Okay.
Very predictable, but I mean, Breaking Bad is fantastic. I mean, it's one of those series. I'm sure you've all seen it, or many of you would have seen it. That at the time when it came out, you know, it's a few years ago now, but you know, I've got two daughters, and they were teenagers, and they were quite difficult teenage daughters. That we weren't getting on particularly well. But Breaking Bad became our common ground, which is, you know, this terrible show about a methamphetamine deal. But
Come on, kids. Come on,
let's gather round, and that became for a while our gather around the television moment. It's terrible, isn't it? It's terrible.
Same for me. It was the one series that our son watched with us the
That's
whole way
right.
through.
That's
With
right.
a few moments where you're kind of going, is it?
Cover the eyes. Yeah.
I know. It's a terrible, but you know, just such brilliant in every, you know, the plotting, the writing, the directing, the performances, And the fact that they sustained that for 5 series right to the end, it's just phenomenal. You know, I mean, to make something like that would be wonderful. And but you know, I think that was a real rare beast. You know, I think but there's lots of great television coming out. But yeah, but Breaking Bad,
That
but
would be
definitely for me, yeah.
All right, and finally, apart from Rusho,
Yeah.
favourite novel?
Oh, you threw that one at me.
Oh,
I
I
wasn't
know.
expecting. Favorite novel. I'm a big fan of the English-Japanese writer Kazuo Ishiguro.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I don't know if this is my favourite novel, but I do often go back to The Remains of the Day, which is a beautiful novel that he wrote about the butler and the sort of. And I love his combination of, you know, it's quite there's comic moments, but it's very truthful and beautifully written as well. That's the first one I could think of.
But I'm noticing all very, you know, real characters throughout
Yeah,
that trifecta.
that's right. That's right.
It's real people.
That's right. I mean, I think that's the joy of what you do, really. I mean, it's about life, really, isn't it? You're just trying to reflect or some, you know, to see that's why you go to movies or you go to read your books. It's just sort of try and gain I don't know, a sort of insight or understanding, I guess, or a revelation of some sort, and perhaps never quite getting it, but always feeling like it's just out of reach.
Well, Shirley, it's been an absolute delight to chat to you
thank you.
this
It's been
evening.
lovely to be here.
An absolute privilege for us to just listen to just a small snippet of your wonderful
Thank
industry
you.
experience. And we do hope that we can actually formally invite you back
Yeah.
while we're on camera
Yeah.
to return and help us, perhaps by doing a masterclass or a course
Look,
down the track.
I would really love to do that, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here, and thank you for coming out tonight. And you know, happy to, if you want to come up and chat afterwards, happy to keep talking. So thank you, and thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Andrew and Kate, for having me here.
And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.